After years of moving from one foster home to another, Casey was finally prepared to establish her new home officially. However, as the judge entered the room, Casey felt a sense of unease. As the hearing commenced, she quickly realized that her new parents and the judge were colluding. Determined not to be silenced, Casey bravely stood up, and a hush fell over the room. What would unfold next? Casey was a cheerful and outgoing young girl who lived in Sleepy Hollow, New York. Her mother had tragically died during childbirth, but that didn't seem to prevent Casey from being an adventurous child, determined to get the most out of life. Some speculated that perhaps it was her mother's death that inspired her to be this way. Despite her perseverance, Casey's life would unfortunately be met with more tragedy. One day, her father simply disappeared. Casey had no idea where he might have gone. He just never came home. The police investigated the disappearance, but couldn't come to a definitive conclusion. Casey's dad had vanished, leaving her an orphan, all alone with both of her parents now gone. Her family had to decide where she would go. Even though Casey had aunts and uncles, they already had kids and were unsure if they could afford to take care of her. While they talked about what to do, a surprising option came up. A neighbor and friend of Casey's father contacted the family and offered to take care of Casey. They knew her well because they lived next door and were close friends with her father. They were also very upset about her father disappearing suddenly. Casey's aunts and uncles thought about the neighbor adopting Casey. They were touched by his offer and the fact that he and his wife had been thinking about adopting anyway. It seemed like a perfect match. Casey was actually closer to her neighbors than most of her family. After a lot of talking and dealing with legal matters, Casey moved in with her new foster parents next door to her old house. She was very happy about it. She knew and liked her neighbors, and she was still in the same neighborhood, right next door. This meant she would keep seeing all her friends in town. Despite the weight of her father's sudden disappearance, Casey gradually adapted to her new life. Her foster parents treated her kindly, and she continued attending school and maintaining her friendships. However, as time passed, Casey began noticing peculiarities she couldn't explain. Casey noticed some strange things when talking about her father with her foster father. He seemed nervous and sometimes told small lies. She tried to understand why he acted this way, considering how uncomfortable the topic of her father's disappearance was. While she appreciated her foster father's good qualities, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Rather than getting angry, Casey felt confused about his actions. She was fascinated by mysteries because of her father's disappearance. She started reading true crime stories and became fascinated with detective stories like Sherlock Holmes. She even dreamed of becoming a detective herself to solve the mystery of her father's disappearance. Even though the police were still investigating her father's disappearance, they assumed he was dead because they hadn't found his body. The case stayed open, but there were no new leads. Despite not being sure if she could solve the case, Casey was determined to find out what happened to her father. She wanted to learn more about her father to keep his memory alive before others forgot about him. Casey talked to people who knew her father, like her aunts, uncles, and coworkers. While talking to one coworker, she noticed that they were acting suspiciously and didn't want to share information. This made her think that the coworker knew more than they were saying. Intrigued by the suspicious coworker, Casey probed for information, initially facing obstacles. Eventually, she encountered someone willing to divulge details that would unravel the case. To Casey's surprise, she discovered that her father and the coworker had been involved in an illegal underground sports betting operation. Unaware of her father's illicit activities, Casey pondered whether his disappearance might be connected to the clandestine betting operation. Confronting the suspicious coworker with the newfound information, Casey questioned the truth of the revelations. Initially denying it, the coworker eventually confessed under Casey's persistent inquiries. He admitted keeping the information from her to preserve a positive image of her father. Expressing his admiration for him while acknowledging the harsh reality, the coworker disclosed a shocking detail. 3 individuals owed significant debts to Casey's father, and according to him, they had not repaid their debts. This revelation left Casey astonished and contemplating whether the debts might be linked to her father's disappearance. Casey was shocked by what she learned and asked if the police knew about it. The coworker admitted he hadn't told the police because he was afraid it would cause problems for his family. Feeling ashamed but wanting to protect himself, he told Casey instead. Realizing the danger, Casey decided to talk to each of the 3 people who owed her father money to see if they knew anything about his disappearance. She knew it was risky, but she believed she had important information that could help solve the case. She started by talking to the first person, who admitted he owed money but didn't know anything about her father's disappearance. Casey didn't think he was involved. She then talked to the second person, who knew more but seemed harmless because of her age and health. She even offered to pay back the money she owed Casey. The big breakthrough came with the third person, who acted suspiciously and refused to answer questions. Despite the danger, Casey kept investigating, determined to find out the truth. Recognizing the need for assistance, Casey, being underage, sought an adult to help process the gathered information and collaborate with the police. Uncertain of whom to trust, she identified one adult she believed could be a reliable partner in her quest for answers, her Aunt Susan. Susan, a free-spirited individual whom Casey held a deep admiration for, was a kindred spirit. She had contemplated adopting Casey in the past, but ultimately felt that Casey was better off with her current foster parents. Despite this, Casey sought Susan's support in light of recent developments. During their meeting, Casey disclosed her investigative efforts and the revelation about the gambling operation involving her father. Susan, taken aback, marveled at how a young girl could accomplish such a feat on her own. She suggested that they inform the police and let them handle the investigation. Casey, however, disagreed, expressing concern that involving the police prematurely could lead to serious consequences for everyone connected to the gambling operation. She insisted that they should only approach the authorities when they possessed crucial information about her father's whereabouts. While Susan was uncertain about this approach, she agreed to keep Casey's investigation confidential. For the time being, uncertain about how to process the information Casey shared, including doubts about the truth behind the gambling operation, Susan felt concerned about Casey engaging with strangers on her own. Deciding to assist Casey with her investigation, at least temporarily, Susan became deeply involved in the quest to uncover the truth about Casey's father's disappearance. Susan was unsure at first, but she became more curious about solving the mystery of the disappearance. Together, they decided to get more information from the third person who owed money to Casey's father and who she thought was hiding something important. To make sure they could talk to him without him running away, Casey and Susan planned to meet him at his workplace. They found out that the third person worked at a movie theater, so they went there together to talk to him. At first, he was angry that they came to see him at work, but he agreed to talk to them outside with Susan there. However, he refused to admit anything and got defensive. When Susan pushed him for answers, he got even more defensive, called her crazy, and threatened to call the police before going back into the theater. Feeling disappointed by how things went, Casey and Susan went to a diner to figure out what to do next. Susan thought they might have hit a dead end because the person wasn't cooperating, and she suggested going to the police. While Casey was initially okay with this, she came up with a new plan. She convinced Susan to talk to the person one more time, offering to forgive his debt if he paid it off. If he didn't, they would involve the police. Susan was unsure about this plan but agreed to try it. She went back to the movie theater alone and told the person that if he paid off his debt, it wouldn't involve the police. Feeling pressured, the person agreed to pay off the debt and promised to get the money during his lunch break. Taking advantage of the situation, Susan pressed for more information from the debtor, who now, fearful of police involvement, became more forthcoming. He shared additional details about Casey's father and dropped a bombshell. He believed that Casey's father had been murdered. According to the debtor, he theorized that someone aware of the gambling operation targeted Casey's father, aiming to steal the accumulated money. Susan was shocked and asked the debtor how he knew this information. He explained that Casey's father had been worried before he disappeared, thinking someone had found out about his illegal gambling. Susan told Casey what she had learned from the debtor, but they still didn't know who had killed Casey's father. Feeling stuck, Casey and Susan thought about going to the police with everything they knew. But before they did that, Casey had to deal with something important, finalizing her adoption. Despite the mystery, Casey had been happy with her foster parents, and they wanted to officially become a family. Casey was excited about having new parents and looked forward to celebrating her adoption. She put her investigation on hold and took a moment to be happy about her upcoming adoption. The night before the adoption meeting with the judge, Casey had a heartfelt talk with her foster father. He told her how much he cared about her and how she was like a daughter to him. Touched by his words, Casey was eager to make her relationship with her foster parents official. The next morning, her foster father had good news. He got a big bonus at work, and they would soon be moving to a bigger house. Excited about the new house, Casey went to bed thinking about the adoption the next day, but she had disturbing nightmares that night. Casey woke up in the middle of the night from some bad dreams, but she couldn't remember exactly what they were about. She heard her foster father doing something in the basement, so she quietly went to investigate. She found a bag full of money and papers with bets written on them. This shocked her, and she wondered if this money was from her real father's illegal gambling. The next morning, instead of going to her adoption meeting with her foster parents, Casey decided to tell the judge the truth about her father's disappearance. She revealed that her foster father had killed her real father and stolen the gambling money. The judge was shocked, and the foster father tried to run away but was caught by a security guard. He was arrested, and Casey was comforted by her aunt Susan, who adopted her. Casey's bravery and investigation had uncovered the truth about her father's death.